Danylchuk has been creating a war diary since the early days of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022. Today, we're reviewing the last 12 months, a terrible anniversary that for many in Ukraine has been the hardest and most traumatic period in their lives. But the year is not ending in tragedy alone. There is also hope on the horizon of a comprehensive Ukrainian victory in 2023. Also, Ukraine has emerged from the shadows of history to forge a strong national identity and storm the world's consciousness. Welcome to the Silicon Curtain podcast. Please like and subscribe so more people can discover the fantastic guests that we have on the channel. Danylchuk aims to tell the truth about Ukraine and Russia's war and cut through the noise and propaganda in her highly popular YouTube channel. Anna is passionate about the beauty and independence of her country and communicates this powerfully in her videos in a clear and honest way. Now, I should say, Anna, this is the third time that I've been privileged to welcome you to the channel, and I'm absolutely delighted to get the chance to speak to you again.
It is the third time that I'm really honored to be among your guests, because I am an avid fan of your channel, and I'm really grateful for this really deep conversations and senses that you find with your guests, talking about my country and talking about everything that surrounds war in Ukraine.
Well, I think we're all on a process of discovery. I think people had very little idea of, how Ukraine was distinct and different. And I think some people have been following the war and, as part of that process, they've also started to discover Ukrainian identity and culture and realize that there are such huge differences. And it's been a revelation for me as well. I had no idea, for instance, that the painter Ilya Repin, who is probably one of the most brilliant painters of the Russian imperial period of the 19th and early 20th century, I actually had no idea that he was Ukrainian at all, and that Ukrainian motifs and themes appear in many of his works. I knew that Gogol was Ukrainian. I had no idea what his original name was, which, everyone assumes it's Gogol, but of course that is a Russification of his name. And I'm on this journey of discovery, realizing, how much cultural appropriation and cultural suppression has gone along with the Russian imperial project.
Yeah, you are very correct in that observations, and this is an advanced knowledge of this examples of Russification, because there were lots of this surface examples that anyone who is not interested in the history of Eastern Europe, for example, can guess. Like, all people are speaking Russian on many territories of ex-Soviet Union, not because this is native language, but because they were actively Russified. And the problem is that Russian language was never like the classical lingua franca, or people had choice. It was always the language of education, of professional communication, and for more and more people, it was easier to choose Russian language and Russian culture as their identities, especially when they traveled from the villages, provinces to centers. And some demographical studies demonstrate abnormal processes, like, for example, at the beginning, of 40s, there were 60% of Ukrainians, and then without any serious movements and changes in the life of the region, they have only 20% of Ukrainians. Where have this 40% disappeared? They have decided they are Russians. So this process was really dangerous, and stealing Ukrainian identity, Ukrainian history, is a trademark of Russia. And honestly, we have these two groups. If we talk about famous Ukrainians, we may divide them. Those who were represented as Russians but still consider themselves Ukrainians, and those who decided that it's easier to be a Russian in a Russian empire, in a Soviet Union, and identified themselves that way. But once again, we cannot say it was a free choice. It was the environment, toxic environment in which they lived. And what like today, when we think of the start of Russian full-scale invasion in Ukraine and remembering Putin's speech in which he denied the existence of Ukraine and Ukrainian identity, culture, language, independent history, we return back to this like ideology. For them, Ukraine does not exist, and what they try to do actually to match their ideas with the reality, because what they do here is they don't exactly like conquer lands or infrastructures, they erase them. If you look at the cities and regions that spent some time under Russian occupation, you see that they don't treat these territories even as their new hosts. They treat them as like, I don't know, parasites, barbarians. They totally destroy everything, erase cities, kill people, destroy factories, plants, steal, transport and take it to Russian Federation. So they don't even act as like, I don't know, invaders who plan to stay there for long. And what makes me really proud and gives me confidence in our victory is the fact that after centuries of this denial of Ukrainian language and culture, in much worse conditions, when we did not have internet, when we did not have international support, and even like during times of Holodomor, many countries preferred like to close the eyes for the sake of something. Today, it is all visible. So it is all visible that Ukraine is very different, not like slightly different, but very different from Russia. And it's not just about culture or language that we speak, it's about some internal qualities that we pass from generation to generation. And also, it is that despite all of this orders, laws, terrors, holodomors, like we still exist. I honestly think that many cultures would have disappeared long ago, including Russian culture, if they had like a stronger empire who would fight against them for so long. And Ukrainians managed to survive. So perhaps there is something that we must do in this world. We must be present. We must like continue developing. And I do think that we have lots of good qualities. We are very like friendly, open, very different from Russians. Maybe our task is like to get back to these roots and to demonstrate that the history and the culture of this part of the world is not dark and cold Russian soul, but many beautiful people who live in Poland, in Lithuania, in Ukraine, like they're different.
And that brings to mind a phrase I was corrected by Peter Pomerantsev, who I spoke to some time back, and I talked about fighting, and I accidentally mentioned the Russians and fighting, and he said no, Ukrainians are good at fighting, Russians are only good at dying. And are not particularly effective at fighting. And I think that's been the other revelation of this year, hasn't it? Is how extraordinarily inept and incompetent the Russian army is, how ill-equipped it is, how lacking in strategy it is, how the effects of nepotism and corruption, which we knew existed in the Soviet Union, but that was 30 years ago. I think that's been the incredible shock, is to see that in that 30-year period, really practically nothing has changed. My first trip to Russia, where I stayed in Moscow, was in 1992. And last year was a terrible sense of deja vu that, all the progress that anyone who'd learnt Russian or became interested in Russia back in the 90s, and there was some optimism, that has been crushed and destroyed in realizing that really this 30 years has seen no progress whatsoever. And in fact, what Putin's regime seems to have done, to me at least, and this became apparent, I think, in 2021, it's turned the clock back to, a cross between the Mongol horde in the 1930s. So the progress of the 70s even, and I think there was cultural progress in the Soviet Union in the 70s, all of that seems to have been erased. We've gone back to a very dark and troubling time.
Yeah, I do agree with your observations, and one of the reasons why Russia constantly attacks Ukraine because we're capable of some changes. Some of them are for the better, some are not, but we are like, it's always trying something, learning something. But also, what makes me think, because, like, at the very beginning, when I was full of this hatred, I loved talking about how impossible everything is in Russia and we cannot change anything. But now I realize that even if Russia collapses as I wish it, uh, something Russian will stay next to the borders of my country, and it is our eternal problem. And I start thinking, how can we change that society, make it less like susceptible, if it's possible to say, to such propaganda, hatred, misery, like desire to destroy, not to construct, not to learn from your neighbors, but to steal from your neighbors. And I, so far, I cannot come with this idea. And I think that the problem is what is optimistic about Ukraine, and I constantly repeat that in my videos and in your interviews, perhaps, that we have strong and healthy civil society. We have lots of active people who resemble many European people, those who like make us actually European, who like to change something in their yards, in their offices, who are active in building their environment, be it local or national. And in Russia, I have never seen these processes of society doing something. And even that progress that you've correctly mentioned in the 70s, it did not come from these grassroots initiatives. It was like normal management that worked for a couple of years. But it all came from above, from a very limited group of people, and the rest were like following this railways and not asking questions. And that's the problem of their society, because otherwise, it's really difficult to control 140 million people, uh, like a group of oligarchs, criminals that are spoiling lives, that are in isolation now, and still they are presidents, they are deputies, they are respected. And for me, it's a mystery.
And it's the land area, isn't it? It's the vastness of the territory. It's the it's the very poor yield of a lot of land of Russia in terms of agriculture and wealth means that you can't build transport infrastructure, effective transport infrastructure in the kind of concentration you get in Europe. And of course, Ukraine has very rich land, therefore is able to potentially invest more in infrastructure and communications, whereas Russia is just this vast land that presses down on your psyche. If anyone who's ever traveled there will realize that it can be extremely oppressive. It's both impressive and oppressive at the same time. And I did the Trans-Siberian at some point, and there was a period where we went for about 6 hours in the train, not seeing the lights of a single village or house or farm or factory. Imagine that,
But
6
they
hours
still
of literally nothing.
need more territories. They need more territories.
Well, this is it. I almost split up with my girlfriend for having an argument where she pointed out that Britain was so small and what was the point of it. And I made the comment that millions and millions of square miles of swamp is still swamp, but that's a little harsh, of course. But it is an oppressive and vast territory, which I think causes psychological issues.
uh, I don't want to forgive them their sins,
Oh
because
no, I'm
they
not letting them off the hook. No,
like,
it's
but I think I have like some observations. Many people who travel in that is direction, they describe things like, when you travel in Russia, you see a lot of village houses that are in a really bad condition. They don't have like much orchards, or they don't have fences. They may have like a goat standing tied to a tree or something. And moving westwards in the direction of Ukraine, and even Russian classical writers, whom they like so much, mention that in their works, you see how houses change. And even Chekhov wrote about that, like they look so neat and so white, and you will see families working on the fields, you will see fences that do not hide the beauty of the gardens, and you see this changes. So it all starts with the small house where you work hard, and Ukrainians always wanted land. They always lacked that land. And we are a big country. We are like the biggest country in Europe, but other diplomats advise us not to mention that because it can irritate other countries. But I do think it's about like making order first in your own house, then making it on your street, then making it in your town, in your region. And that's what civil society is about. And
Mm.
then you start working with this vast territories and swamps. Very often you can come across like not very diplomatic things that imagine if all of that territories were given to the Chinese or the Japanese or something, they would definitely know what to do. And instead of spreading misery, poverty, and destruction on new territories, it would be wiser to concentrate on um, things that happen inside of your country. I was once surprised, like, I'm definitely not a fan. I don't see opposition in Russia right now, but I don't see any like person that I like there. But I remember seeing one TV show with Sobchak, and I did not expect, she was saying like, why Russia did not become a member of NATO. There were plans like that at the beginning of 90s. And then I realized, okay, guys, you have the largest country in the world with lots of natural resources, many beautiful places, interesting cultures,
Cultures,
uh,
nationalities, yes.
nationalities, like lots of potential. If you want to keep them together, it's a hard task, but let it be. And in the 90s, imagine when all of these territories were open and they could start cooperation with various international funds, invest. I think lots of these territories could have changed and become inhabited with plants and factories built and other things. And of course, we may say that some transnational companies, that's a bad, but that is like life is, like they say it, like living kills you. Everything is bad, but not that bad as empty, hungry, drunk people in the dark streets. And they could have cooperated with the world, and world could have used Russia in this normal perspective, and Russia could have been useful not only as a provider of natural resources. Because come on, like one of the messages that I want to record my video to is that often people equate Russia to the United States or China, saying like these are superpowers. And I want to say, no, please. Of course, really big countries, they always influence global decisions. We may say about positive and negative sides. I won't, I'm not an expert in that. But both the United States and China produce a lot of things. Like they are strong economies that are based on various things. And you may want an American car or a Chinese telephone that is like still good. And do you want a Russian car? No. Can you find a Russian telephone? No. So they are not on the level to compete with these super countries because they are not a super country. They like pretend to be a super country, and many people who know little about Russia believe. But then when you dig deeper, impress me. Well, I guess you have, like, guys, this is not your like you did not do anything to have that gas or natural resources. What else? Like writers of the 19th century, okay? Fast food, like after McDonald's left, what have they invented? Something that like others want to borrow? No, there is nothing you want literally from Russia. And even those people who come to live or who want to live or study in Russia, like in the largest country in the world, there are not many who want to do that. There are, but not many, not that many as people who want to live in France or even in Britain, being smaller countries. And those people who want that Russia, they want it from a cultural, anthropological, exotic point of view, but not let me live in St. Petersburg and have normal standards.
And I
I
think
doubt.
that's, I mean, when you look at Russianists, of which, you know, I clearly was one. I got into originally into this by, you know, reading Russian literature. Well, no, the first literature I read was Gogol. So in fact, it's Ukrainian literature in Russian that got me into an interest in the area. And I think most people get sucked in, as I did, because of the history of the revolution. Although I now realize that there are so many aspects of that I didn't understand by not seeing the sort of Ukrainian part of that history. But really the launching point of the 19th century, because you'd have to go back really to the 19th century to find a period where Russia did have some kind of impact on world culture and was able to produce unique and original, you know, cultural artifacts that people still quote. There was maybe an echo of that, you know, in the Silver Age and the, you know, the early 1900s, perhaps up until the 30s, when everything was utterly destroyed and killed. But as you say, after that period, I mean, yes, there are achievements in space and there are things to do with power and the projection of power, but there's very little in the way of cultural products that that have been exported. I mean, oh, there's Tarkovsky, but how many people have watched Tarkovsky's films? Probably a
Yeah,
tiny,
not
tiny
none.
percentage, but there's not much that was exported around the world.
Because like they like to control everything, and controlled products of art, they are not impressive. Russia does not support its unique, strong, unusual people. And to be strong in the art, in the culture, you have to be like unusual. You have to experiment. Can you experiment in Russian society? I doubt. And yeah, honestly, I feel like very pessimistic when I think about this like intellectual layer that must live there, and they are totally silent. And like and technologies and education and other things, if not only to focus on culture, there are many things that they don't produce, don't impress with. They try to, and that's one of the reasons why Putin tries to return them back in history, where it all seems more like, serious. And this is where he once again encounters Ukraine as Kiev Rus, and it does not work the way he wants. But like, okay, it's good to know your history and to derive strength from your history, but you're living in present and you have to provide your people with everything. And once again, I'm sure that if people in the United States or elsewhere lived in the conditions Russians live, especially far on the periphery, they would like, I don't know, demand the presidents and government changed everything. And the United States would not have like a space program because they don't have roads elsewhere. And in Russia, they don't have active society. They don't have like a road, they don't have toilets, but they need this space program to play with China and the United States. But it is just a facade. And that's what happened when we saw Russian army. Of course, to some extent, now many of our generals say it's wrong to totally overestimate the enemy, because like there are many of them, and at the very beginning we had lots of like people speaking like everything's going to be fine, we are winning. We have to be strong and to realize that we are fighting a strong enemy that has lots of human resources, that still has military plans. But at the same time, yes, definitely they were bluffing. So they are bluffing about everything. And many others, normal, they don't believe it's possible on a state level. And they start like the president said, that it must be true. No, if it's a Russian president, it can be nothing.
No, finding a word of truth is like a needle in a haystack, I think. And I've listened to far too many speeches of Lavrov and Putin over the last year, and I can't remember finding an original idea. Yeah, I know. You commiserate with me. It's very painful experience. But I can't find an original thought. I can't find a single idea which impresses. And it's, you struggle to find anything truthful in any statement that's made. And that talks to a deep level of not just political corruption, but I would say civilizational decline. And I think that creates an extraordinary future, sets up an extraordinary future where you have Ukraine, who perhaps has been somewhat sort of meek and, hiding its talents, not shouting enough about its talents and culture. That I think is changing now. The need to survive, the need to project Ukrainian identity, to gain partners, friends in the West. And even to gain the sort of courage to fight and survive and resist Russian propaganda and that sort of, again, cultural progression, projection as well. I don't think Ukraine is going to be silent, even when the war is won. We're going to see a very loud, forceful, strong identity being projected across Europe from Ukraine.
I hope so. I know that there are people already who are afraid of that and who think that maybe Ukrainians will become too self-centered. But being in Ukraine, I can guarantee you that's not a problem and that's not a danger. We are a kind of culture and nation that typically underestimates itself. It's just like that you are saying, all of you are saying that we are brave and strong. It is not very typical that, for example, in a Ukrainian pub, you will hear lots of people saying that Ukrainians are the best in that, or Ukraine. No, you will hear that like the English are the best in that, and the Poles are so good in that. We were hidden behind the Iron Curtain, and for decades did not have contact with foreigners. And the typical Ukrainian coming in contact with the foreigner is fascinated with his language, his history, his culture. So we are like total anti-Nazis. And I'm not sure that there is a danger that even winning this war, we will turn into a supranational country that surround us. Like even our neighbors, some of our neighbors, I'm not going to name them, but like I feel when traveling that they are more nation concentrated. In Ukraine, it's not the fact, and to some extent, it was like even bad. Like one of Ukrainian famous writers and philosophers, woman, said, the mother of Lesya Ukrainka, who is like our one of the most famous authors, Elena Pchilka, said that all the problems of Ukrainians are because of their extreme tolerance. And this extreme tolerance was present in relations with Russia, in like knowing centuries of bad history and still believing, okay, it won't happen. We were slow showing ourselves to the world. Well, first of all, because the world was not really interested. And for many, we were like something Russian. And we were not strong enough, and perhaps we believed we still have years to do that. First, we have to mend the fans, to change the roads. We have problems with roads and other things, and then we will come out, and then we will show you. But a problem happened, a tragedy happened, and it is very important that after a year, it is already a victory. After a year, the situation changed tremendously. Before the war, like many people all over the world believed that these are last days of Ukraine. Some felt sorry, some felt like it's a logical thing because it is Russia or something. But like the majority were ready to mourn us and to watch what will happen. And a year after, no one has a doubt. Many of you have T-shirts with Ukraine or Ukrainian flags, and that is already our victory. So honestly, I try to imagine what is the victory that Putin thinks of, like when he continues this war. I understand he does not have a choice, but still he must project some kind of victory. What is that? It's obvious that you cannot erase Ukraine and Ukrainian culture anymore. We were strong individually, but now after the world saw us, liked something about us, like they will not forget. It was easy to erase Ukrainian archives, but you cannot erase Ukraine everywhere. And by the way, I constantly think that internet is hugely important in such things, because when Holodomor happened, imagine we had internet and we could take photos and post them even on Instagram. Maybe more sensitive people, influential people all over the planet would do more, because like they saw it, they witnessed that, and you cannot like erase it from your memory. And that's what internet gave us right now. When people saw Bucha, Irpin, when people saw these grannies standing against Russian tanks, this is what persuaded them. Not that much political speeches, but like seeing real Ukraine. And internet gave that opportunity. So I'm definitely the one who always say like technologies are bad, but they are vital. And I cannot imagine what he thinks, like what may happen. Like, we will give up? No, because for us, it's an existential fight. If he will come to my region, I will fight, because I understand that fighting, I can die like 50-50, but not fighting, I will die like 100%. So he cannot stop us with his missiles, electricity outages. That's obvious. So what's the plan?
I mean, it's clear that his plan is now survival, nothing more than survival. And I think one of the challenges, of course, isn't it, is that, yes, the Russian army has proved to be relatively incompetent. They have equipment. It's not the best always. They have, ridiculous generals who've got there through nepotism and have very poor strategic understanding from top down to the bottom. But they're prepared to take losses that no other country on earth, I think, would actually sustain or be prepared to do. And that talks about the sheer callousness and lack of respect for life. They're prepared to accept a ratio of 6-1, 10-1 killed on their side, and they literally don't care. I mean, if you look at Putin as a mafia warlord, I think that's fine, and you can understand that he has absolutely no conception of the value of life. What is extraordinary to me is that conception of the value of life, or lack of it, seems to permeate all the way down through the command structure, even to people at the bottom rungs of the army and society as well. People will mourn if an individual from their family passes away, and there are videos there of people, on public transport who get the news in Russia that, one of their loved ones has passed away. And there's a stark contrast to how you see Ukrainians reacting. Whole streets of people going down on one knee, church services that honor and respect that individual, whereas there seems to be a collective indifference and callousness on the Russian side, which I think has shocked a lot of people who thought that was something consigned to history, or perhaps weren't aware of Russia's history.
Yeah, and you think, I still believe that when you are doing something really bad or something really good, you always know that. When you're doing something like typical, your ordinary activities, sometimes you can make mistakes, like I don't know what, and then you realize it was a wrong choice. But somehow I believe that deep down inside your brain, soul, and so on, in Ukraine, people, we mourn real heroes, because these people who came to protect who are protecting their own land, territories. We are in our home, we are fighting here, we're not allowed to go out, everything must take place here, all blood must be threat here. When Ukrainians were sent back in coffins from Afghanistan during Soviet Union, I don't think there were such funerals. Why? Because perhaps they were doing something different. And somehow, maybe on this subconscious level, even those who are shouting with anger and hatred, that's what they lead them. But maybe they still realize like they are not doing something like, I am like confident, whether you believe or not, that like God is not on their side, no matter what happens. And they must be punished for that. And at the same time, once again, deep down inside that Russian soul, and maybe that's what helped them build communism, because once again, if you like that revolution, you also understand how unlikely its success was. When I am like not a fan of that period, but when I look at some Lenin's observations, it seems to me that even for him it was a surprise at a certain point of time, like, oh my God, it's actually working. And maybe because Russians do have this built-in mechanism for sacrifice, for misery, and they program themselves. They like feel like dying and suffering is a normal part of reality. And if you want something different, you got to be punished for that. I often laugh at Ukrainian women who, and I teach my students in the course of translation, there's cultural differences, and even I can do it sometimes because that's a heritage that travels. Like when you receive a compliment, normal compliment, like for example, I like your sweater. It is very common. Like 80% of women will not say thank you. Oh yes, I like it too. They will tell you, oh, that's an old one. That's my grandma's. Oh yeah, but the color is not the one I wanted. It is very common in many ex-Soviet countries to excuse yourself, to ask your sorry for having something good. If you're having a better house, if you're having something, they wanted to teach you to feel guilty. You are guilty if you have stolen something, but if you have come up with startup paying taxes, you're cool. And in Russia, it's not like that. And maybe because they are lost in these territories and they cannot grasp and start building something, and they really need outer help. Like they always think we have biolaboratories, NATO and Americans ruling us. I think they need biolaboratories and Americans ruling them because they cannot make it themselves. And Chinese know that, and slowly, and Russia. But I do believe that this is the difference. Like an average Ukrainian knows that he does not have many chances to live a really happy and safe life, because even after we win, this is going to be a difficult period. But if you ask any Ukrainian, any of my students, he or she wants to achieve something. It's a part, like ambition is a positive word. It does not mean I will sell my soul for money, but it means, yes, I want a better house. I want a better car. I want to take my parents on a trip. That's good. And Russians, they kind of, together with their literature, with their philosophy, they often want to say like, okay, I don't have anything, but I will shout for my country. Okay, I don't have anything, but I will come and I will kill you. And what's the like? And then I will kill you, and that's the story. I don't know if they want anything. They on this personal level, they are always told what they must want. But have they ever like looked inside? There are lots of this European trends that we try to introduce in Ukraine: tolerance, understanding. Like bullying is a question that highly discussed now. When I was in school, bullying was like a part of policy. Everyone, teachers would bully you. That's like normal. But now we start thinking about that, and we realize that no, it's not something unnecessary. When you become when you live in a better country, when you have more food, you have to start thinking about this spiritual things, moral things. And in Russia, their president is a bully. They still live with that, like, and they don't try to fix it. They don't try to copy that. Once again, I've maybe I don't want to repeat myself, but I've told you that lots of Ukrainians, they worked abroad, and when they work abroad, they don't hate people abroad. They want to borrow this values, borrow traditions, and the way you organize your flats. And Russians, they want to come, and what they did in Irpin and Bucha, like left their physical leftovers everywhere on beds and something, wrote something on. Why? Once again, if it was an army with any kind of values, moral things, they would never do it inside of like houses. They would never destroy it because they would believe these are our houses already, our cities. No, but they are acting like animals, and
I think it's very telling, isn't it? You know, we've seen pictures of the trench systems, and it's shocking, of course, that anyone should have to live and fight in trench warfare. You know, anyone who studied the First World War, it has a horrible resonance from something that should have been consigned to history more than 110 years ago. But again, there are nuances and differences. If people have watched these videos, you see some extraordinarily elaborate Ukrainian trenches where they will go to incredible efforts to try and dry proof them. There'll even be I saw one with a television in there and you know, a PS4 or something. Now, and this, you know, that's, you know, that is great for a video theme, and of course most people aren't going to be able to live like that. But there does seem to be, relating it back, as you say, to the neatness of the villages, the tidiness of the roads and the gardens in front of the houses. You can make a direct connection to that, and individual responsibility, and to the way, in some ways, the war's been conducted. And I'm sure many people who've watched the sort of military videos will have seen the Russian equivalent trench systems, which are barely scratches in the ground, with people living in mud. Now, I know there's going to be, you know, complexity on both sides of those stories, but there's that very kind of stark comparison, isn't there? That Ukrainians are prepared to work hard to improve life in the present. And also there's the realization that if you want something good, you have to work for it. You have to put your own sweat and effort in. And I think there's a very deep sort of psychological difference here. On the one hand, there is responsibility and an understanding that wealth and comfort comes through tremendous efforts. It's difficult. And I think that seems to me the Ukrainian attitude. And maybe that stems from the fact Ukraine, at its heart, was an agrarian culture, and people needed to work incredibly hard to generate that wealth from the ground. They didn't just dig it up and oil spurted out. Now you have to work incredibly hard to create comfort, wealth, and culture from the earth. Whereas Russia seems to have a different attitude in the way that it has grown as a country. It's almost like one of those sort of, you know, Ponzi schemes where, you know, you take more and more and more, and more territory you get sort of funds the territory you already have. It's like a giant pyramid scheme. And there does seem to be an attitude where people seem to expect luxury as a right, and not a privilege. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think you can relate some of these cultures down to economics. You know, if you can acquire gas, oil, minerals easily from the ground without having to think hard, without having to form complex societies and complex institutions, it gives rise to a certain type of government and a certain, I would say, sort of lazy kind of attitude. Whereas if you have to do backbreaking work to generate your wealth, it creates again an entirely different social attitude.
You're too kind to say that is a lazy attitude. That is a parasite.
Parasitic. That's the word. Yes, that is the word. It's parasitic.
Yeah.
There's no other word for it. Yeah.
I can honestly tell you that in Ukraine, when you especially analyze this cultural level, superstitious level, people always, when like they say easy come, easy go, like about money, if you have, for example, one in a lottery, you have to spend this money quickly because this is not the money you can build your well-being on. You did not earn them. You do not deserve them. Like you got them, but like spend them on, I don't know, makeup or travel or a trip to Italy, but do not think this is your money. This is just like, by the way, there is a superstition that if you find money on the road, on the floor, like it's very typical Ukrainians don't pick them up, because someone who lost them lost their problems with them, and like picking up somebody's money that are not yours, you were picking up bad things. Like, so it shows that like you have to know, like this is yours, you worked hard, you want this, but you work hard for that. So you're very correct. And why did they have so many problems with Ukraine when it joined the USSR? Because of private property. we did not have classic like slavery or something here. Even people who worked for the landlords, they worked like 4 days, and then they had 3 days for their own businesses. And private property, even small private property, was very important. And this dekulakization, Holodomor, is actually a fight against Ukrainian middle class, not like super rich people, but people who wanted to have their own cow, their own orchard. And this love for private property is extremely important. And once again, it takes us to the European values. And this nomad ord standards, like when you come and you get something. And once again, once one of my subscribers told me a very interesting idea, and it will support your idea, that in Russia, many people, like they do not think that you can achieve wealth by creating something, because on a certain stage it will be like taken away from you.
That's
uh,
absolutely true. Absolutely.
their understanding of wealth is that you take it from someone, from another country, from another person. And I do understand we had something like that at the beginning of 90s, when it was like mafia everywhere, that, well, one huge country collapsed, another country was building up. And there were stories like you have a successful business, a small business, and then people come and tell you, I will buy your business for 10,000. And you say it costs 100,000, and say, or I will take it away without any money. But it all disappeared quickly in Ukraine. Honestly, it is not a typical situation. There are cases like that, but there are cases like that everywhere, like all over the world, and they are always on the news or something. And so people are not afraid developing successful businesses, and we have examples of that businesses. We have examples even of that businesses during war. And in Russia, an ordinary person, if it's a smart person, perhaps understands that as soon as he or she reaches a particular and falls into the attention of stronger people, everything will be taken away. And the society accepted that, and the society repeats that when it loots. Honestly, I cannot, like, I can imagine myself like in Putin's apartment. Okay, let's imagine he's henning and I'm like looking around. I would not take anything out of that. For me, that would be like bad. Like, and even if, like, after all that Russians did, I would never loot in their houses. I would never take anything for myself. Trophies are guns and knives. I don't know, maybe some identification marks of your enemy. Gowns of the wife of the killed by you person is not a trophy. And it's all in Russian history, starting from the Second World War. And you know, there is a huge discourse here in Ukraine, even too, because we had like lots of veterans, and people start seeing like, oh my God, we always liked that cups. And we realize that they are from Germany, they are trophies. And now we realize that it's not okay to take cups from, it's different. Like, oh, this is our favorite music recorder. It's, oh my God. And then they see that their grandparents were doing things that like Russians are now. And I think that this feeling that it's wrong, it's energetically, psychologically, and on all levels, it's wrong. So Ukrainians will not take them. And Russians do. And this dig and sell economy, someone told me, and perhaps loot and steal economy. And
Absolutely.
that's it.
And that was another phrase that Peter Pomerantsev said. You know, I was being perhaps a little bit too kind. I said that, some people earning money in Russia, would try to make that money and spend that money as fast as possible, because they'd have an understanding that it could disappear at any moment. And I said that was, impression I got in the 90s. And Peter said, no, that never went away. And it wasn't confined just to a few people. Everybody believed that whatever they could earn could be snatched away or stolen at any point. And that is a terrible thing. And for those who think that it might just be a product of the 90s, that it might just be a product of a particular epoch in Russian history, that's not the case. You know, it cuts through like a stick of rock. And I remember being in a village, and I used to like collecting, you know, phrases, you know, little kind of you know, phrases that perhaps were only used in a particular village or somewhere, posloviцы. And there was one, and I couldn't understand it. It took me a long time, and they had to explain it over and over because I just wasn't getting the concept. And the phrase was "Dengami i dora kupit," which basically means even an idiot can get something with money, which suggests that there's a peculiar intelligence that if you can steal it without paying for it, then that's, you know, then that means something. That's something to be valued. And I found it obviously amusing. It's not amusing anymore. But you can see that theft has a number of components. Yes, there's envy, and there's hatred, and there's loathing, and there's greed. But there's also something else which I think people are missing, and that is the idea that theft is clever. Theft is a clever political strategy. And I think it's not, but I think that cuts through the Russian mindset.
Yeah. And the fact that they do not come in contact with other cultures actively does not teach them much. For example, when I was a student, we had a professor from the US teaching us some of the subjects. And I remember how surprised he was when he saw that we copy from each other, or when someone like asks you to help, you help that person. And he had a very serious conversation with us that, like, in the US, no one would give you to copy his work. Not only because, like, why, that's my product, but also because by giving you that copy, I stop you from learning something. It's just a class, it's just a test. And if you don't know, you don't know. And that American students don't have this habit, like, it's not a part of the culture. And the part of our culture is like when someone asks you, even a person who beated you on a break, you are given the answers because, like, you are not mean, you are not greedy, and it's wrong. And there are many things that every society has to work on, and Russian society does not want to work on itself. They take everything like everything is correct, we're doing everything right. And also it's a part of communism heritage, because once again, like, I'm 100% confident that people need private property. I want to have my telephone, I want to have my bed. I like traveling, but then I like this feeling of returning back to my things. And it is something built in. It's like the desire to be loved, or when you're hungry, you want to eat. I think it's illogical to fight this human quality, the desire to have something private. Like, very few people won't need that. They will go to monasteries or else will let them. But the majority in the society wants to have something. And in communism, they were trying to make everything like everything belongs to everyone. And if it's never like that, then party elites started taking more of everything for themselves. And people in various collective farms, they started stealing once again, because they also want to have something, and because there is like something, there are other sayings, posloviцы, that I'm trying to remember, but their meaning, if to convey them, is something like this thing lays in a bad way. Like, if it is not, if it does not belong to anyone, then it is nobody's. Like, then I can take it. If it's not yours, then it's mine. Or I don't like where it's like. And this is when people study. I actually think that into Ukrainian society, this stealing from work and came with Soviet Union. And people were boasting how much meat they could take, for example, from the meat production. How do you call it? Like, and
A
lots of
processing factory or something, yeah.
processing back, and that looks ugly because they would hide it somewhere tied to their bodies. or how many sweets people were able to take away. And this is sad. And like when, or buckets that were stolen from a collective farm. And that is an example, like when there is no person responsible for that, there is no person for whom it is by own, like it doesn't work.
And I think people would be shocked, when you see that kind of corruption and theft day in, day out at every level of society, many levels of society. You have to experience it, you have to live it and see it. Otherwise, it doesn't make much sense. And one of the shocking things I remember is, staying in a village for a week and doing all the things you go, do in the village. You go to the banya and the little wooden hut in the middle of nowhere, and it's snowing, and it's all that kind of stuff. But I'm waiting for the bus, and I'm saying, okay, the bus is due. Well, here comes the bus, and it's due in 1 minute. Let's run. And I'm told, oh, no, don't worry. The bus will leave in 5 minutes time. But that's late. What's going on? The bus came into the village. They reversed the bus into someone's yard, siphoned off the fuel, and then the bus, it's not a one-off. It's like every single day of the week. They would,
and everybody knows, and everybody knows.
And everybody knows.
Yeah, and the one that, and if you tell about that to the police, you're treated like a traitor. And it's another thing that we still have to work on. Here in Ukraine, we introduce laws that, for example, if you see that someone lives not in correspondence with his or her income, you can report. This is something common in the world, but for Ukraine, it is still like, oh, I don't know. But in Russia, they will never do things like that. Like why?
And that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because I mean, I got a big long list of everything that's happened during the year, and I think this conversation is far more interesting than just going through what happened month by month. But there was one significant event, and it's really important, I think, that event happened before the EU delegation came earlier this year, and ahead of Biden's visit, and ahead of a huge tranche of more weapons and funding. And that was the anti-corruption initiative launched by Zelensky, and not just against officials in general, but against some extremely significant officials, and of course against the oligarch who supposedly helped Zelensky's ascent to power. So if we link up these sort of ideas of sort of small-scale corruption, where is the war driving Ukraine? Is it driving it more towards Western standards of sort of probity and this idea of not being able to, thieve from the state and get away with it?
Yes. Once again, like we have this active society, and I see it in my city, I see it in my region. And all of this like crimes and thefts of oligarchs and people who surround them, they are known. What is also important that Ukraine did not close itself from various funding grant programs, and they are super important in such environments. In Russia, they have closed all of these initiatives, and they call them grant eaters. And the general image of a person who works for a grant program is like negative, that they are sponsored by the rotting West to perform rotting tasks. But in reality, for example, I live in a region that is a little bit influenced by one of the oligarchs, and we have some feudal things. For example, the TV channel, local websites belong to his group. And it's very difficult to find something negative on that TV about him. Or, for example, when he needs something, that information keeps reappearing. But at the same time, we already have lots of other websites that are funded from independent sources, and they are writing the things they need, the things people need to know. And this kind of information, like people do not respect these oligarchs here. most of them are the people who had connections with Russia, who worked with Russia in this gas, electricity sphere, oil. There are not so many of them, like in comparison with Russia. And for me, I want to treat them as mammoths or dinosaurs, like the dying kind, because definitely they do not show up anymore in the public spaces as it was in the 90s. In 90s, they wanted to create, or during Yanukovych, for example, period, they were trying to show themselves as celebrities, intellectuals, and take active part. Now they have passed to another stage before the war, buying other people with better reputations, because they realize that their faces irritate audience, which is already good. So we did not treat them as bosses or hosts or, oh my God, millionaires and billionaires. They were not invited to the universities also because they cannot tell the story of their wealth. And questions will be asked, which makes us different from the Russian society. We will not say, oh my God, you are a billionaire, that is so cool. We will say, come on, you say you were selling, I don't know, fur hats. One of them told he was sewing fur hats, and then he became a billionaire. What happened in between? And also, so there are many anti-corruption initiatives, many of which are started as grassroots initiatives, like when people don't like something, I don't know, a historic building given for a hotel, and then they start digging and they find who is the owner. And I think similar things happen all over the world, but they are public. They are hiding from the public now. They are no more like members of various advisory boards or something that was common. And of course, I do think that the society is 100% active and 100% against them, and all of these names and stories are known, and every region has its media that speaks about that. But I think that West should even be more aggressive with our politicians, who sometimes feel obliged to their investors. This is not like a Russian story. It's not a tendency. You cannot say that they are bought and they do what oligarchs tell them. But out of 100 decisions, 12 may be negotiated. And that's a problem that we have to fight with. But with war, I don't see that we are drowning and getting backwards in fighting corruption. I see the contrary. Why? Once again, because people daily die for Ukraine. People die, people lose their relatives, people live in bad conditions, stay without electricity, anything, continue working here, earning less salary, because they love the country. And they don't want their country to be raped by someone. People are getting more aggressive about that. Okay, so my son died for the country and you want to loot my country. So I see that the society is more polarized, and I do hope that I haven't seen or heard any loud case of corruption in the sphere of military now. It was before the war, some things, but now people are very attentive. There are lots of volunteers, and you will not still of course there are cases, but these cases will be everywhere. But in general, I do feel we are fighting. We are to some extent, and when you start talking with many very liberal, tolerant people, I have friends in Poland. They are not speaking for all Poland, but they told me, or in Austria, I have a subscriber who told me oh, if something similar would happen to me or my country or my city, it is very likely that we would have given up, right? Because we want to live, we don't like this everything, and it's easier to give up. And we did not choose this way. We decided we will fight. For us, it's an existential fight, but this is a very high price. We are fighting, and we realize that we are fighting. Once again, if to look at it from this animal perspective, for very abstract things, we are not fighting for food. We are fighting for language, culture. For many people, these things are not of top priority if you are not very intellectual, spiritual, but the whole country, the whole country supports this fight. Nobody wants negotiations on the conditions of Putin. You know that Ukrainians, we are aggressive. We fight when someone wishes you peace. We say you have to wish us peace after victory, or you have to wish us victory. We don't need your peace. We need to win this war finally, this existential war that lasts for 300 years or more. So people realize that we are fighting for something really abstract, something emotional, something spiritual, something cultural, something that cannot be eaten or touched. And that's why we cannot allow others spoiling that thing we are fighting for. So we are fighting for something ideal. And if they want to like rape it, as they say, you cannot, because like people die daily for that. And you just want to get something. So people, I think, are very aggressive, and they are going to be aggressive. Of course, now all the attention is on the front lines. And these people will try, like even oligarchs will try saying, why are you fighting with us? Go fight there, and so on. But people are angry, and people know that this is a Russian tradition, and we don't want any Russian traditions in here.
And I think, probably, coming up to the sort of final set of questions, but I think two things sort of emerge from that, which I think are fascinating. One, of course, is the realization that oligarchs are not just oligarchs. They will say, oh, I just want to make money. I'm not interested in politics. Leave me alone to make money. But it's become quite clear that the oligarchic system and individual oligarchs are a point of strategic weakness. They're a point where Russia can exert influence, where it can change policy decisions via these powerful individuals, because they will have potentially less of commitment to social issues, to national questions. And for those who doubt that, we see this process working out in Donbass, and a big part of the invasion was the ability of Russia to manipulate companies that were controlled by oligarchs that either were Russian or influenced by Russia. We see that process in Moldova and Transnistria, and the potential coup that's happening there. Again, they're using the oligarch influences as well as local politicians and assets. We see in Belarus the same process of how they're able to take over that country, which is de facto a part of Russia. It hasn't been formally annexed, but essentially Russia no longer needs permission to conduct military exercises from the territory of Belarus. It doesn't need permission from the Belarus parliament to position unlimited amounts of troops anywhere it likes on the territory of Belarus. To me, that means it's no longer an independent territory. But the oligarchic system is a key vehicle through which Russia exerts influence, mounts insurrections, and corrupts society. So I think it's a really important question. And yeah, it has to be kind of tackled. And the other point that I was going to ask you about is this idea. I mean, you've talked about survival, you've talked about the values that Ukrainians are fighting for, and the sort of perhaps even just sheer stubbornness, which is a brilliant characteristic. But it also seems to me there's something deeper going on here, which is that Ukrainians are fighting for a future, because it seems that the Ukrainian concept of the world is that the future can be better than the present. Whereas the Russian mindset seems to look back and say the best was in the past. And all we can do is preserve this so-called, cadaver of our culture. Is that sounds harsh, but do you think, broadly speaking, there's those two characteristics of the very different sort of motives for fighting?
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And I think that it's normal for a country to be future oriented. This is the only logical survival mode. Of course, we have to value our past. We have to learn from our history, but we cannot sleep happy because we were Kiev Rus. Okay, we were, and then there were lots of other things. And in Russia, perhaps for me, I think they do not believe in their own society, and it is pretty depressive. Like when at the end of your life or something, you start thinking about all the good old days. I do think it's important even for a person to start thinking, what are the good things I can do today still? How can I enjoy this sunny day or whatever? And to some extent, they will never accept that, but perhaps they gave up on the possibility of their nice future and they try to find um, strengths in their good past. And their past was not good. It's just like looking from that prism. Those people who glorify Stalin today, maybe they would have been killed by him, but they don't think so. They forget about that. They focus on their empire consciousness and they think that being a part of the empire will make them happy. No. And I think that it's very correct that someone, it seems to me, Gedroids or someone else told that Poland can only be successful when it forgets its empire past. And Poland did. And Poland became a very modern, innovative European country that manages to balance between traditional society values and like their standards, normal democracy, freedom, and a common like space of development. And empires will not like enter, at least old empires will not enter this new world. And Russians do not want to accept that. They believe something really bad will happen, like, I don't know. They would definitely like an asteroid or an aliens to destroy everything and Russia will only stay. Even look at like Putin when he used this nuke speak, like nuclear language, trying to threaten the world. And he always said like, we will do it when they attack Russia, because why do we need the world without Russia? A Ukrainian would never produce a phrase like that. Because we understand like the word without Ukraine is bad, but still it's good for many people. We're not that like, it like, you continue living without something, and it's huge like arrogance or whatever to say things like that. We don't need anything, so they are not ready to cooperate, they are not ready to support. If you're not Russia, then we don't need anyone. That's very mean, that's very greedy, or how do you say it in a better way? And this is, so in general, I think there is a huge civilizational gap between Ukrainians and Russians. It was not so vivid even for us before the start of the war. And during this year, I have rediscovered my culture. I've always been like into history, culture, but I'm really happy that many people who are not into history and culture turned out to be very normal and very correct in the decisions that they make without like serious background. So there is something inborn, I don't know, something in this water that we drink or in this air that we breathe that makes us so different. And if you ask about this like values that are super important for a Ukrainian, this will definitely be freedom. And stubbornness comes with that. We don't like to be dictated. It may be that I will agree with you, but don't you tell me what to do. And I think it's normal. Freedom, independence, ability to work on your land, have your like piece of territory or have your like zone in which you can develop. We never dream to hijack something. And these are very actually important values, and I'm really happy that they came into the center. Because before the war, I realized that many people knew little about us, and they believed like we will agree to the conditions of Russia. And even I had some doubts at the beginning, because you witness lots of really awful things. It's not about electricity outages, it's about dead people on the streets of Kyiv, like the heart of your country. People like your students getting bluish, like we have this awful, really awful photos, and it's happening, and you can hear explosions in your own city. So it's all very real. And in such stressful conditions, people can make wrong decisions sometimes, and we didn't. We made that correct decision, and we haven't changed it. We are not doing this winning or something, and I'm very, very proud of that.
And I think along with the air and the water that you talked about and the sort of imperceptible differences, it's also the stories that people tell each other. And I think this process you've talked about of rediscovering literature and history and not just trying to find mythologies in there. And I would definitely point people towards your channel, because you've got an amazing series of videos on Soviet mythology. But it's about examining history and looking for interesting, nuanced stories and complex stories that you can tell about yourself, rather than trying to cherry pick, mythological stories that support some kind of power structure in the present. And we can talk about politics, we can talk about Russia, we can talk about all sorts of things. But I think the only thing that's going to fundamentally change Russia is when they start telling themselves different stories, when they start examining their history and they look for stories of rebellion and resistance and difference. And there are a few stories there, stories about the Novgorodian Republic rather than Muscovy and its expansion. And it's only when they break down the totalitarian interpretation of history, the warping and mythologizing of history, that I think we'll start to see any change. And as you said as well, ground up changes, starting with your own individual house, starting with your neighbors and your street, and working from the bottom up, rather than Russian history, which almost universally is a top-down process.
Yeah, they have to realize that no matter how deep they travel into their history, they are not an empire. Even with all these armies inside Ukraine, because I don't like empires, but empires are always strong and more developed than the territories they want to occupy, economically developed, scientifically, or whatever. Russia is not like that. Russia is poorer, less educated, less innovative than Ukraine, Poland, Baltic countries. So it cannot be a center for us, no matter how hard it tries, and no matter how much it manipulates and maneuvers with the history. And I do think that lots of these individuals who come to Ukraine and see our ordinary towns, they realize that we live a better life. And perhaps they have some cognitive dissonance or something, because they were told that they are the best, but they are not. Another thing that we practice in Ukraine, and I think it's very therapeutic, that we speak about our historical figures, about our writers, painters, honestly. And we may say that he was good at that, or he was bad at that, or he was correct politically in the first half of his life, and then he made a mistake. It's normal. They are people. And I think we have to discuss some negative sides of our history, wrong choices, and Russians never do that. They don't say this was a bad ruler and that was a bad behavior of our country. They never ask to excuse them. Like Ukraine has asked many times that we are sorry for that or for that, because if you have hundreds and thousands of years of history, of course there are lots of things that you screw up. And that's normal. And the same about the United Kingdom, I guess. There are lots of things that you would have done differently with this kind of mindset now. And it's okay when you just talk about that. And then it's easier, because all of us make these mistakes, but Russians, they don't. And they don't work with their traumas. They don't work with the mistakes that they made, and they don't learn. So if they oppose all of that, how can we change that society? I don't know. We have to start talking about that. But I see that ideas appear. Many people are afraid of the collapse of Russia. Many try to visualize its democratic future. So far, I cannot. For me, honestly, it is the collapse of Russia, many new republics, national republics that are different. And of course, something Russian will stay, like Muscovy zone, and all of them live independently. And I am sure people will figure out what to do with their nuclear powers. And it is not the problem that can we have to keep Russia because we are afraid of what will happen. Russia is dangerous. Russia is already happening. Russia is already terrorizing the world. So I think it's always easier to work with smaller countries, and it's easier for smaller countries to survive. Sometimes it's even like on the other side, Baltic countries, they say, oh, you're developing too slow, and then you say, okay, but you have so many regional councils, you have so many different people, it takes you more than a day to travel from one side of you. It's difficult to run a country like that. So you've said maybe all these territories and lands of Russia change their mindset. So maybe if we change their territory, their mindset will also change.
I believe that entirely. I believe
And they will be liberated. They will
yeah.
be happy. I'm not saying like to punish them with that collapse. No, they will start living in more comfortable, more product service oriented countries, innovative countries. They will travel freely. They will invite others. They will enrich from other countries and speak about their like past if they like.
Absolutely. I think, the only way to redemption is to build identities and communities from the ground up, and for people to develop a sense of belonging to a region, to a city, to create individual cultures and identities, and to have democracy at every single level of society. Even every factory, every street, every village needs to have that process. I have no idea how that's going to happen. It seems extremely improbable, but I know for sure that it will not happen in a top-down process because that's never worked. And yet the West is, and they always do that. And yet the West is still focused on that. The Russian opposition is still focused on top-down solutions. And I can say, I think we're in agreement here, that is just doomed to fail. Whereas the Ukrainian approach seems to be bottom-up reform, civic society, and changing institutions from a human level.
We like laughing and quarreling with our politicians. That is very common. Everywhere on the street, you will hear people saying, and demonstrating some kind of disrespect. And I think it's healthy, not glorifying them, but like, because they are humans and we see lots of their human mistakes. And I so much like when my subscribers tell, I will write my senator, I will write my not I will try to address the most respected like in Russia, in Soviet countries, it's like it was always typical. Even like my parents would say, like, you cannot ask your chef this question. Why? It's not private, it's like job question. Why cannot I ask? And so this is once again, perhaps this is this like old style behavior, like where you have to respect someone because he has a higher position than you. No, you have to question these people, and these positions, they are not sacred, they are elected. But once again, you don't have elections in Russia. When you said that you want democracy for them, that is a good thing. And I want them to start wanting democracy. To start like before they get it, it's a long process. We are still fighting here, but at least to start wanting, to start thinking, oh, maybe that's a better mode of living than tsardom.
And not to do it because somebody else has said it's a good idea, not to do it because the West has said this is how you need to live, or no, they need to do it for their own sense of self-respect, for the sense that they control their own destinies, that they have agency in their own lives. They're not doing it for other people. And I think there is still that mindset that we're doing this because we think it's the right thing to do, because we envy the West and its material standards. Therefore, maybe we need to take some of these, systems along with it, and, they don't feel natural. But no, they need to abandon the idea that it's on behalf of somebody else, or a master, or a chef, or somebody. They've got to embrace it themselves for their own sense of self-worth.
Exactly. When they start caring about themselves, about their like personal life, their family life, their city life, their country life. But I don't see any symptoms.
Well, let's end on the positives of Ukraine and those values that clearly have transformed Ukraine and helped to so far, survive in this war and have some stunning victories. I know we're at the end of our time, Anna. It's been another tremendous pleasure again speaking.
For me too. For me too.
And
I
I had
think,
no idea when we started where the conversation would go, but I think we covered some really interesting ground.
yeah. And one thing that I am afraid of is that people will let Russia play long, really long, like not half a year or a year, but like 5 years or 7 years, and Putin will still be a president. And then I'm afraid that we will be exhausted and countries will be exhausted. That's the only thing that I am afraid of now, like literally, because this has to stop. Like crimes, dictators, they cannot like continue for decades. This is the moment, like, once again, this will not bring Putin victory, because like everybody saw that, like, will they sacrifice such a different country? Like, no one will be happy like if Ukraine disappears. You cannot live normally like witnessing a beautiful country dying. But at the same time, this is what he hopes for right now, that things will change, people will distract, and will continue playing long. So that's why more arms, weapons for Ukraine.
More weapons, planes, more leopards. I think the more weaponry, the faster it's provided, that'll actually save lives on both sides, and it will precipitate a change in Russia, which will bring the war to hopefully a sustainable conclusion. Well, Anna, I salute your bravery and those of everybody in your town, your city, and your country. And I think on the anniversary of this, because this video is going out on the 12th-month anniversary, all we can wish for is a speedy victory and a bright future. And Slava Ukraini.
Heroям slava. I wanted to say glory to heroes and got lost. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for, I don't know if it sounds like polite when I say quality, but thank you for this high quality of your conversation, because the conversation, this is something totally different. And I could continue for hours talking with you because of your background and your knowledge and your like sensitivity to all this cultural and worldview things. And there are many things that I discovered for myself in our conversation. So I'm very grateful for that.
Well, that's very kind. That's very kind. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Me too. I plan, like, I want to learn a little bit more, and I plan to record some interviews too, because there are questions that I want to ask, but I'm not afraid of interviewing. I'm afraid of this technical aspects, and I have to train on some people that, because I don't want like to talk to you 2 hours and then oops, I've lost the recording. Don't hate me. So that's what I will do, and I will definitely invite you if you will agree, because that's
I would love to do that. I would absolutely, definitely love to do that. And yeah, maybe put a panel together. That could be fun. And who knows, maybe we could do it on site as well. That would be an incentive to.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes.
Totally. Thank you. Let's hope for that. Let's do this optimistic perspective, future oriented.
Thank you so much. Have a brilliant day. Stay safe.
Same to you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye.